Hi everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be talking about the Tiananmen Square massacre. Forgive me if I pronounced that incorrectly. We will also talk about issues on government overreach, censorship, and flaws in education. First things first, demonstrations began on April 15th, 1989 to protest corruption and inflation and call for broader political and economic reforms, Office of the Historian 2019. The night typically referred to as the breaking point, however, was June 3rd and 4th, 1989. The event is even referenced as the June 4th incident due to censorship issues. For several weeks, varying numbers of students gathered at Tiananmen Square to protest leading up to this event. The military's original outlook was to issue warnings but take no actions toward the protesters. However, Li Peng and Deng Xiaoping feared anarchy and insisted that they had to forcibly suppress protesters. In the last weeks of May, martial law was declared and troops were stationed around Beijing. As June began, the military was ready to act again. Tanks and heavily armed troops opened fire or crushed anyone trying to block their way. When the soldiers reached the square, the remaining protesters chose to leave rather than face continued consequences of confrontation. By the morning, Tiananmen Square was empty of all protesters. Sporadic shootings continued throughout the day, however. By June 5th, the military had complete control, though one notable instance occurred where a single protester stared down a line of tanks, aptly nicknamed Tankman, Britannica 2025. The next most troubling issue, outside of the fact that many lives were lost, is the air of secrecy. No one knows the true number of lives lost that night, and though the Chinese government did release a number that they claimed was accurate, it is an obvious response for everyone to be skeptical, seeing as they were also promised that the troops would not attack the students, and then they opened fire without warning. The Chinese authorities want everyone to forget that they killed hundreds, if not thousands, of unarmed, peaceful pro-democracy protesters in Tiananmen Square in 1989. Amnesty International UK 2025. Following the night of June 3rd and 4th, the government tracked down those involved with the protests, detained them, tortured them, and imprisoned them or executed them after unfair trials. Not only this, but those who lost someone were not allowed to mourn them openly because the view of them was as rioters and counter-revolutionary criminals. People have to be cryptic in mentioning this topic. Discussion, commemoration, and demands for justice have been stomped out. This is just despicable. Those families cannot mourn, cannot host a remembrance, cannot hardly bring up the loved ones that they lost because they could face punishment. Like always, I will provide all my sources in the Patreon, but in that is this link to a PDF article that talks more specifically about what the people who were trying to speak out were facing, how survivors of the event are being treated, censorship issues, and suggested steps to the Chinese government as well as internationally. It is labeled Human Rights Watch, the Tiananmen Legacy, Ongoing Persecution, and Censorship. Furthermore, I found details from a law firm explaining how important this incident was, because basically the Tiananmen Square massacre shocked human rights organizations worldwide and set the precedent for advocacy against oppression internationally. People recognized the importance of protecting civil liberties and political freedoms, and it influenced the conversation and policies that were being made. Countries began to reevaluate their human rights laws and policies and strengthen them. The event highlighted the need for legal mechanisms to protect against state violence and repression, influencing the development of international human rights laws and protocols, Grongo Law 2024. The fact that people around the world realized how detrimental this incident was, and yet it continues to be censored, and its victims' silence shows that the system is so beyond reproach. There isn't even space for the voices necessary to discuss the flaws, which makes it so complicated to even begin to dissect. How does this add to conversations in government overreach, the right to protest, censorship, and the flaws within education? In conversations about government overreach, the Tiananmen Square massacre adds a depth of understanding and enough background to develop pattern recognition when it happens right in front of us. A few things that we should try to consider. The current police system that we have in the United States is a for-profit system. What that means is that it was the reform of slavery, free labor, and all the government had to do was come up with the crimes. Secondly, positions of power are likely to draw abusers in like moths to a flame. That is because the opportunity for them to exert control that they may not feel in other aspects of their life, or they do, as lots of times you will see these sorts of people have backgrounds in domestic violence or SA. Again, keep in mind I'm speaking generally. This is not just about the police. It is about teachers, pastors, counselors. Any position of power can and eventually will draw in some bad apples. What we get from this combination is a lot of needless violence. Obviously, I understand the necessity for mitigation and harm reduction because similar to how positions of power will draw in people looking to assert dominance, a protest will bring a few people out who are just looking to start violence. Oftentimes, however, these are the same people, and the presence of police acts as both the fuel and the match. If instead of immediately trying to control and put out these protests, we try to hear their voices, work with them on solutions, and have social workers and mental health professionals along with only the necessary amount of public workers, yes, some police officers, EMS, reporters, whoever may be needed to make sure protests go smoothly with the least amount of injury, we might find that a lot of this unrest and violence that they speak of is not perpetrated by the majority, but only a small few who are looking for confrontations. In conversations about the right to protest, the Tiananmen Square massacre adds a harrowing portrayal of what can happen when our rights are blatantly ignored. If you don't have the right to come together to speak upon injustice, then your system does not value your input, and there are broader issues within the freedom of speech, even more so with its companion censorship. If you have the illusion of a right only to be assaulted when you exercise it, then your government is misdirecting and manipulating you into submission. This specific illusion reminds me of the parts in Animal Farm by George Orwell, where the rest of the animals know that they're facing some sort of injustice at Napoleon's hands, but they don't have the right words to express it. And the ones that do have the words to express it are hushed with the promise of violence from his snarling dogs. There is a reason why George Orwell's works, but specifically Animal Farm, has been banned multiple times. It teaches you things that authoritarian leaders do not want you to know. Censorship and the flaws within current education systems. When it comes to censorship, however, the Tiananmen Square massacre leads to much larger issues within our education system, and we see it everywhere. We see it when Japan doesn't speak but one sentence. I don't know if that's the right phrasing of that, but the exception of one sentence in their textbooks about the R word of Nanjing, Nanking, and Comfort Girls, which that was one of the only videos that I have put up that was pretty much immediately censored. Not like the video, but like they removed resources. Granted, you have to already be careful on the internet anyways, because you're gonna find a bunch of resources that aren't accurate, but we've seen that Wikipedia did not used to be trusted, and now it's one of the better collections of human history. Obviously, there are some people that are going to go in there and mess up articles and stuff like that, and so you have to take things with a grain of salt, but typically, if something is not backed up with resources on Wikipedia, it will tell you that it needs further citations or whatever. So, generally speaking, when I provide resources that I have looked into, I try to very carefully differentiate between the ones that are people's opinions on things and people's opinions on things interjected with the facts, and just the facts, because you can separate like dates that things happen. That's not an opinion. But yeah, obviously you have to be careful, but it didn't like my resources for whatever reason, took them down. So that's kind of why I've been redirecting people to Patreon if they're trying to further their research on specific videos that they come across. But I got a little off track there. We see it when America constantly tries to move away from the entire truth of its history with the treatment of natives, with slavery, the government overreach, and thousands of cover-ups. He who controls the past. I say that to say this, the best thing that we can do is try to listen to each other and grow our perspectives. We've been taught to be individualistic to the point that we don't even recognize when our suffering comes from a lack of community, a lack of support, and a lack of discussion. We could learn so much more if we worked in accordance with each other's strengths and weaknesses, but we are so misguided by all the fighting that we cannot begin to hold people accountable. We cannot make up for the suffering so many have faced because we cannot get through the challenges we are facing right now. It's the same cycle, and yet it seems we never learn because we never see the root of it all is learning. This feels like a half-baked take kind of video because I feel like I got lost there when I was writing that, and I feel like I got lost there when I was reading that, and that there's more to it, but I don't know what the more to it is. So there's a lapse in information. If you have that added information, always feel free to correct me in the comments, because the whole reason that I make these videos is not only to educate my community, but to educate myself on things things that have happened. That's why we're learning about it together. And I want to always use the most up-to-date form of information on my topics in the way that learning is just a form of science. You get the new input and you have a better output. But anyways, like I said, I'll have all my references. I just want to say thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you so much for watching. I don't think I have anything else. Either way, I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.